Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Level Up podcast. That is right, we are back for our second season and we are so excited about what's to come next. I thought really hard about what I wanted the first segment of this new season to be about. And I guess, I don't know, if you've been following along for long enough, you've realized kind of that how things progress, for example, from the first section, which was about branding and positioning, to the second section, which was about social media, and then the third section, which was distribution. I'm kind of trying to structure things in a way where it would make sense for what I believe to be a healthy progression and a healthy progress of learning for independent artists, especially with the focus on the Asian music industry. But then after that, I was thinking, okay, what next? You know, there's so many different ways that we could go. We could go into like management, we could go into PR. These are all topics that we are wanting to go into in the future. But especially because I think there was something that just inspired me somehow. Like when I thought about it, I was like, hey, why don't we do something like that? And that topic was mental health. So I can't remember exactly what inspired me to want to do a topic about mental health, but when I thought about it, I was like, actually this makes a lot of sense. And it's not really something like the intersection between music and mental health isn't something that I see talked about very often, especially for independent artists who are based in Asia or wanting to navigate the Asian music industry. So not really in that context. And at the same time, I think independent artists, especially during this COVID pandemic, they are really truly a vulnerable population. I have enough friends in that situation to know that they are going through something, and I have a lot of respect for them because I think artists, independent artists in themselves, they are entrepreneurs. So they have to rely on themselves for a lot of things, and in those early stages of like ramp up, they don't have a lot to work with. They are constantly bootstrapping everything. They have to be the boss of themselves and potentially even partners that they work with. And at the same time, there is financial instability, there is uncertainty in terms of what is going to happen next. There is never a roadmap for what you can do next in order to launch your career. These are all things that actually make independent artists very, I would say not fragile, like vulnerable during this time. And it has been a hard period for them all. And so I thought, definitely this is something that I want to talk about, because before you get too far in your artist journey, I think you should always start by prioritizing your mental health, creating a good foundation on which you can learn to manage your own expectations for yourself and also set boundaries with the people around you, because no one in the music industry is going to teach you that. It's not the most healthy place to be in. But I feel like I can't go on about mental health for like an entire podcast episode by myself, because first of all, I'm not a licensed like mental health professional in any way. And second of all, I honestly I feel like I'm on this learning journey as well. So I want to learn from someone who I feel has the right qualifications and has that very specific approach that is really going to benefit independent artists. And then I found Shapes and Sounds. So Shapes and Sounds is a platform created to provide mental health resources, especially for people who are of Asian Australian heritage. But in general, I feel like a lot of the resources that they provide on the website can actually be used for people who are just part of the Asian diaspora or just Asian in general, because I feel like being based here in Singapore, there aren't that many resources, or there is still a very big stigma around talking about mental health. Shapes and Sounds is created by Asami, a first-generation immigrant from Japan who has felt firsthand how mental health works differently for people of Asian heritage, and especially those living in Western countries such as Australia. We are absolutely honored to be able to have her on the podcast to impart her knowledge about mental health and how it works differently for people of Asian heritage. But even more so, I find it a giant honor to have her explain to us and go deep with us on the lives of independent musicians and the specific help that they might need and the specific advice she could give to them based on their lifestyles and the challenges that they may face and sustain themselves on this journey as independent artists. So without further ado, let's go straight into our interview. Hi, Asami. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast, and I've actually been following like all the amazing things that Shapes and Sounds have been doing for like quite a while now. Are you able to introduce yourself and share a little bit about how Shapes and Sounds was created?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure.
Very excited to be here. I'm dialing in from Melbourne, and that is Wurundjeri land here in Australia, in so-called Australia. So I always like to start any conversations about mental health, like talking about the land that we're on. It's really good to contextualize conversation. So we'll just start there. So to tell you a bit about me and how Shapes and Sounds came about. So I moved to Australia when I was 4 years old from Japan. And my parents moved to Australia in search of like a really free and relaxed and like so-called Aussie lifestyle. What that looked like for me was that they raised me in a very, very kind of like Western manner. And all of my privileges at the time were probably coming from the fact that I was very, very Westernized in everything that I did. And I had a lot of internalized racism, and that like it was always presenting itself, but I never really understood what was going on until much later in my life when I started to study mental health. And just as I kind of matured into an adult as well. Many, many years later, after like doing a lot of different things, two things happened that really helped me to start Shapes and Sounds. So Shapes and Sounds was born in October 2019, and it came about as a blog to start with. And the reason why I started Shapes and Sounds is for two reasons. So there's a formal reason and an informal, and I'll tell you both of those reasons.
Sure.
But the formal, like the answer that I always give everyone is that for 5 years prior to that, I was working in the acute youth mental health, like crisis and community services as a music therapist. And in that time, I witnessed a lot of young Asian Australians, or young people of color, I should say, kind of slipping through the cracks in our service delivery. And every time this was raised, like what's going on? Why are these kids not getting the same care as maybe white kids? The answer and the solution offered by organizations, not just our organization, but across the mental health sector, across the public mental health sector, was that we should increase the number of interpreters and translators in our mental health service delivery.
Right.
But the issue was that I was meeting people like myself, like people who'd grown up in Australia who spoke English. Like language is not the barrier to engaging in mental health services. The barrier is the lack of culturally responsive practice and the lack of understanding about the ways in which culture impacts people's mental health, the way in which culture impacts the language that you use to express distress, your help-seeking behaviors, the way you engage in very, very Western models of psychology. And because of that, I burnt out. It was really confronting. And I turned to the internet, I turned to a blog, and I just started like writing about all of this. All of these things kind of fueled me to start Shapes and Sounds. First, it was a blog, just me writing. But thanks to the internet, it picked up a lot of traction. A lot of people contacted me saying that they'd had similar experiences, that they wanted to know more. And I was very lucky enough to meet Vianne, who is an organizational psychologist. And together we really structured Shapes and Sounds into what it is today, which is, I would describe it as a resource hub. We have a lot of information about Asian Australian mental health. And it's also a community where Asian Australians gather and meet and talk to one another, talk about their experiences, and feel really validated and seen in their Asian Australian identities, which I think is weird that we haven't had this before.
Yeah, I mean, I think as you mentioned, like a lot of people, especially if you're an Asian Australian born in Australia or in, I guess, any Western country, I think it's like, it's not the first time I've heard about that internalized racism, or wanting
Mm.
to be white and kind of like rejecting your heritage, because it's all part and parcel of like growing up, and like in schools and stuff like that, you're not like, the society doesn't actually encourage you to be proud of your heritage. So I think it's like, that's probably why, from my perspective, that like this issue and like this intersection hasn't really come up, especially in the space of mental health. But I
Mm.
honestly think like you're doing some really, really great work. It's really unique. And even though it's meant specifically for Asian Australians, I actually feel like it's very, very useful for just members of the diaspora, and even Asian, like just people in Asia, because being based in Asia right now, I do see a lack of awareness and understanding of mental health, and also like how you can how to ask like educated questions, how to get the resources you need, even no matter if it's in like a professional working environment or just in general. I think the conversation here is still at like, it's not at a very high level. So I think what you're doing
Mm.
is really awesome for all those reasons. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad that you found us.
Yes, shout out to Vivian and
Yeah,
Yo.
yay, Vivian.
Yeah, I always see them sharing about your stuff, and I'm like, oh, this is so cool. But yeah, anyway, yes, so I understand that you're a music therapist. Can
Yes.
you talk a little bit about what that vein of therapy entails, and of course like what the relationship between like psychology and music is, because I'm just really excited, really interested to know more about that.
Mm. Yeah, music therapy is it's actually a relatively new profession, I would
Mm-hmm.
say. It kind of emerged post-war, so like post World War II in the States, in the UK, on hospital wards of soldiers coming back from war,
Mm-hmm.
and they had it at what at the time it was described as shell shock, but what we know now as PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, like a lot of patients were kind of comatose, or they didn't respond to health professionals. They didn't like want to talk. They were just like numb and dead,
Mm-hmm.
like dead as in kind of emotionally not
Yeah.
there, based on the experiences that they'd witnessed in war. And the doctors were, what they noticed was that when the volunteer musicians would come in and play music, as you know, as is common in hospital wards,
Mm-hmm.
that's when the patients would start to kind of either come back to life, they would talk, they would cry, they would, you know, like something would happen, some
Yeah.
emotional release would
Some
happen.
response.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So the profession itself kind of emerged there. It started off like sort of in the medical model, people noticing the effect that music had on people recovering from PTSD. And now it's really progressed into like this profession that sees people. So music therapy is exactly what it sounds like. We use music in a therapeutic context to help
Mm-hmm.
people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're an allied health profession. So in Australia, we sit alongside like speech therapy, occupational therapy, social work, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And we span the whole age range. So you will find music therapists in the neonatal unit, at the Children's Hospital, all the way into aged care and palliative care,
Mm-hmm.
and everywhere in between as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there's only like apparently 1,000 or so music therapists, or maybe like less than that in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
So we're all spread across different sectors. And I've always been interested in working in mental health, and especially youth mental health, because I think music is very, very important when you're a young person,
Of
you know,
course. Yeah.
like even into adulthood too. But don't you think
Yeah.
like as a
Yeah.
young person, we use music in this
Yes.
tribal
Yes.
manner? Yeah.
Yes. We kind of use it in like a almost prescriptive manner sometimes. Well, for me anyway, like when I was a teenager. And that's how I started Asian Pop Weekly as well. Like I was so influenced by music, and I felt isolated basically being in Australia and not really being able to get access to Asian music, that I started to like create this website, created this whole platform around it to create a community. And yeah, I can just, looking back on the way that I viewed music, I think it's very different to the way that I interact with it now. It was really like I relied on it a lot. Yeah. And yeah,
Yeah.
almost tribal. And you know how they say that when you're like, your music taste like stagnate by the time you're 12 or something, like that's the period, like the most memorable period for you in terms of like creating and like solidifying your music taste, or like at least somewhere during those teenage years. So definitely I think it's really,
Yeah.
really important. And of course, like young people have it hard too, you know, in schools and stuff like that,
Yep.
figuring out who they are. So yeah,
Exactly.
definitely.
And like music is like the thing that helps us understand the world a lot too. Like we learn a lot
Yes.
about like love and relationships and
Yeah,
heartbreak through music in our teens, right?
exactly.
It's like our friend, it's our, and then we're like one week we're like hip hop, and then the next week we change all our clothes because we're more
Yeah.
into like I don't know, like anything like pop
Yeah.
music or
Yeah. 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 We just follow the
yeah.
trends. We follow what music tells us to do. We're very
Mm,
reactive. I think we're very reactive to music during that time period. And those who are into
yeah.
it are really, really into it. Yeah. And that's how like
Yeah.
idol culture comes about, like fan culture,
Yeah.
all that stuff. Yeah.
And what's really interesting is like, because we don't have so much reliance on things like religion, and we're not tribal communities anymore, but we're
Mm-hmm.
still human beings.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually, we use music to fulfill those needs as human beings, like to help us shape, oh, who am I? Like, where is the edge of my identity? And I like hip hop, so I'm not going to hang out with like the goth friends or like maybe like emo. You can see how
Yeah.
old I am.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really interesting, right? That
It
we
is.
actually
It
use
is.
music as a
Yeah.
resource to help us.
Yeah, I know that in Asia, I especially like in Singapore where I am, I still feel it's a little bit more religious in terms of like the different communities we have here. It's not as secular
Mm,
as Australia, but across the board, like especially for me in my own experience, I know some people are gonna like kill me for saying this, but yes, music is really in a sense like like my religion. Like
yeah.
I prescribe to it. I do certain rituals every day. There's, yeah, like I have built this very, very strong intense relationship with it, and that was
Mm,
especially happening like in my teenage years. So it's really interesting that you drew that relationship, because I never really thought about it that way before, like the
mm.
relationship between us being more of like a secular society and our relationship with music, or I'm sure like any other like creative art form.
Yeah. And I just want to add like, um, as music therapists, like music
Mhm,
now, we always think about what is the purpose of music? How is music used as a resource to promote health for this person? That's like
mhm,
one of the big
mhm.
questions we ask. So, what I mean by that is like right now, music, you know, like a lot of us use music for entertainment, for
Yeah.
distraction. It's like a product, right? Like a commercial
Mhm,
product
mhm.
that we engage with. But actually, music is one of those things that has been present in all cultures across the world for all time.
Mhm.
And the purpose of music has long been to help communities of people come together in times when words aren't quite enough. So
Yeah.
that's why there's always music at weddings, funerals, like in preparation for war, like
Mhm.
propaganda music. There's
Mhm.
always music present to help groups of people come together. And that's like a really trauma informed approach to using music in therapy, because often when you experience trauma, your language centers turn off. So you
Mhm.
can't actually talk about your trauma because that part of your brain
Right.
has actually shut down.
Right.
But when you engage in that creative expression of music, that's when like different parts of your brain light up, or
Mhm.
you may find that you're able to express what you want to say, but it's not through like verbal
Yeah.
conversation. So it
Mhm.
kind of links back to why music therapy originated. And
Mhm.
also, like, this is the kind of work that I've been doing in crisis work and young people experiencing like a lot of trauma. They don't want to talk to a psychologist, but they'll say things like, just listen to this song and it explains exactly what I'm feeling.
Mhm.
And then from there, a conversation begins. So it's
Mm.
really interesting in the use of trauma informed therapy.
That was actually going to lead me to my next question, because I know that you've done a lot of great work in tailoring mental health wellness programs to
Mhm.
Asian audiences, and also probably like a more creative audience. So I wanted to
Yeah.
ask, like, since 2019, when you started Shapes and Sounds, have there been any like interesting insights or discoveries that you've made in this like very unique position you're in?
So firstly, I've learned a lot about like how many Asians there are in Australia. And there's actually like 16% of the population. That's on par with the African American population in the States. Like we
Wow.
make up a large portion of Australia.
Mhm.
However, we're really missing in media, senior leadership, politics, like kind of everywhere. You know, we're
Yeah.
sort of invisible in our experiences.
Mhm.
Yes, media representation is increasing, but for many of us, we've felt like very invisible. And we've also felt really alone as Asian Australians. Like, I'm the only one that has this like dual identity. I'm the only one that has internalized racism. And everything has been very silent. It's been like, maybe that's also an Asian thing, that we deal with things quietly and silently,
Mhm.
but we haven't had opportunities to like talk openly and externalize a lot of that stress that's been sitting in our bodies. So that's been really interesting to see. So some stats: we make up 16% of the Australian population. Out of the people accessing mental health services in Australia, only 2 to 3% of those are Asian, right?
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. And then when you get into your involuntary and acute care, then we become a bit more representative of the general population. So it means that there is a huge gap of people that aren't getting the support that they need, and they're struggling in silence. And we're just like perseverance. In Japanese, we call it like gamang and gambaru, which means like just deal with it and just keep going. And I think
Right.
many people are doing that. So that's been one thing that we've really noticed amongst our audience, is that people just persevere, and grit is huge.
Yeah.
I think the sense of perfectionism and overachievement is huge as well. Like this need that we always need to do more, that we need to like prove our worth, that we have to be grateful for every scrap of anything that we get thrown our way.
Yeah.
And another thing is the huge presence of trauma in the lives of Asian Australians. And that's like racialized trauma from being Asian in Australia, and also intergenerational trauma. You know, like our grandparents were alive during the war, or many of our grandparents were around during the war, World War II. And then, you know, they didn't have resources to kind of deal from that experience. They just like got on with their lives.
Mhm.
And then our parents grew up with those parents, and then it's
Yeah.
in us now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And as our generation and the younger generation, we now have the freedom and the flexibility to kind of look inwards a little. And the moment you sort of look inwards, that's when it all starts to burst
Yeah.
out as well.
Yeah. Like a can of worms.
Exactly. The
Yeah.
worms have been released, I would say.
Wow.
To use
Yeah.
a metaphor.
Yeah, I think there's so many interesting insights, and I definitely relate to a lot of them as well. All of the things that you said, I think they really it really reinforces the link between culture and mental health, because all those things you stated, they all stem from like Confucianism. I guess it really solidifies why we need people like you guys to show us that there's like it is not normal to be walking around with all this like internalized racism or like guilt or trauma inside of you. And yeah, I think it's really great that you guys provide a space to talk about that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's so complex. And I think that for diaspora, like we live like with a bit of everything as well.
Yeah.
And then we have a lot of biracial audience members, or like participants in Shapes and Sounds. We have a lot of people from, you know, South Asian backgrounds who often get erased in the so-called Asian Australian conversation. We have people from like Japan who have like very complicated history within that, of like Japanese people feel like they're not Asian as well. And then, you know, we have, so between our countries as well, there's been so much conflict between countries in so-called the huge continent of Asia, that it's really important that we have very nuanced conversations that incorporates like diverse perspectives and diverse experiences, because there is no like one Asian experience.
That's, I think that's a very hard thing to do, and like a very noble thing you're doing as well, because as you mentioned, there's not that many practitioners out there who are really focusing on our story, and within Asia there's so many different experiences. So I think that's really, really
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah. Like for me, like in all of my different roles, I've always had a soft spot for indie artists, and I know you have as well. And I have worked with a lot of them, and I know the struggles that they're going through, especially due to the pandemic. And if they are Asian diaspora artists, again, I think definitely they are feeling that pressure from that maybe their loved ones around them, because I know I feel that all the time. So I wanted to maybe throw out a couple of like points that I feel that they might be that might be causing them like stress at this time, and maybe you could give like some quick responses or like quick advice on like how they could take steps towards doing better things for themselves in all of these aspects, if you're okay with that.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yes.
Okay, well, I think the first one that I want to talk about, which you already did talk a little bit about, is like financial stress, because
Yep.
artists during this time, they don't have income, as everyone knows. It's really, really hard, especially since the digital space can provide some monetization, but at the same time, I think that is still something that's very new and growing. So unless you're an artist with scale, it is very hard to make money that way. So yeah, I wanted your thoughts on that.
Yeah, of course, that's a point of stress. So don't blame yourself for that. And also, I hear this a lot amongst creatives, like about, oh, it's not for the money. I don't do it for the money. It's not important to me, which I think is very, very good. And of course, it's not just about the fame and the money and all that kind of stuff. But I think being really clear with your budgeting, how much do you need to survive as a human being in this world?
Yes.
Being so clear with your budgeting, work out how your money is coming in and out, and get really, really good with your Excel spreadsheet. I think that's so important. That's going to help your mental health so much.
Yes.
If you can just get on top of your finances, right?
Yeah, like actually that is, I mean, I guess that kind of goes a little bit into like the finance side of things, but definitely that is such good advice for creatives, because I think sometimes they get very set in that mindset of like I'm a creative, I need other people to help me with all these other things because I don't know how to do them. I only know how to create. But as artists, like that's something that I always want to point out on this podcast. Like if you are an independent artist, you are effectively a business, and businesses at the very least need to know how to sustain themselves. Even if you're not going to be making a profit, even though you don't care about money, you are still a business, and this is your main source of income for many independent artists. So I think being very clear about what you need to survive is going to be very, very important in order to sustain your career, because you can't sustain your career if you're not really like focusing on your needs, like just fulfilling your basic needs. And definitely that's going to cause you some stress. And so it was great that you brought that up. And then the second one that I kind of wanted to talk about was self-reliance, because I do feel that independent artists, they don't get a lot of support, because effectively sometimes they don't even have a team if they're at those earlier stages, and they're really like working in startup mode, like just trying to figure everything out themselves, not necessarily just in terms of mental health, but just in terms of like figuring out all the different areas of the music industry. So like publishing, understanding distribution, understanding how touring works, like trying to figure out who can help me to make this happen, because there is no set rule book on how the music industry works. And I know that does cause a lot of stress and trauma for artists. So I wanted to know how they could really do better in terms of their mental health when the stress is coming from like a self-reliance.
Yeah, self-reliance is such an interesting topic. I myself am one of those people that like does way too many things and like doesn't let anyone in, which is hard. Don't we all, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's been so beneficial for me, which may help others, is to take a moment and explore why you are like this, like why am I like this? Like why is it like a lack of trust in people? Is it a perfectionist thing? Is it like feeling like for many people, and I think many artists and creatives, like maybe no one has really understood them and no one has really valued them. So then over time you start to learn that, oh, I'm the only one that can support me, so therefore I will do everything myself. And I think just exploring that helps you to see like maybe some stuff that's going on for you in terms of like a resistance to help as well. Sometimes there are resources available, but it's like, I don't trust it. I don't want that. I don't trust this person. What are they trying to get out of me? And so, yeah, take a moment to explore why you like, like, of course, there are many things you will have to do alone, especially in the early days, but connection and groups and teamwork and support are so invaluable. And I laugh because I'm like probably the worst person in the world at this.
You're like a
but it's so important
team.
and I'm learning.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good advice, because once you mentioned that, like it is very true actually, that even though, okay, there are not too many resources which are accessible for artists which are like Asian artists, or about maybe the Asian music industry, but I know there are a lot of resources just for independent artists in general, if only you put in a little effort to look. So I think really sometimes it does come from being that mindset. And again, for me, it comes to the topic of like some artists feeling that they need to have this before they can like level up their careers. And until that point, they're like, oh, I'm just going to stay self-reliant. There are also different ways of creating a support group for yourself, other than getting a manager, getting a team, getting a label to help you. It's just, I guess, whether you are really like looking deep into yourself and putting in that effort. So I think that was a really, really good point that you just brought up there as well. The third one was, I think, something that we can all relate to, which is like having boundaries between your work and your personal life. And I feel like for artists, I think this is something that's really close to home, because a lot of them like work out of their bedrooms, especially if they're young artists, or like they're in the same house all the time. So I wanted to get your thoughts on how they could kind of combat this lack of boundaries between their work and their personal life, because also as artists, you are public figures. It can seem like you're personally attacked sometimes when criticism or comments are given. So I think it is amplified in the context of indie artists.
Definitely. Hey, like you are your art.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're also not your art, right? Like there are other parts of you that are not your art too. And it's so blurry. And I'm probably like not a great example of someone that has strong boundaries between work and life. It's all intertwined. But I think really tangibly, there comes a point where you have to not check your emails. There comes a point when you have to turn off your phone, have 2 social media accounts, like really tangible things, just to step away. But also at the same time, it's really understanding that self-worth, that, okay, I'm so intertwined with my art and my music, but I'm also like worthy just as I am. So if the music stops, if no one likes my music, like I'm still okay, I'm still a human with human needs. And working on that self-worth kind of conversation is so important, but so difficult. And like I'm working through it all the time. Like, how do I how do I untangle my self-worth from the success or the not success of campaigns or marketing campaigns? And it's really difficult, but I think that is so important, that we have to do for sustainability.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you really hit the nail on the head. And especially, I'm sure you have a lot of like relevant experience, because I'm guessing that Shapes and Sounds, like it's still like a small team. What you're doing, a lot of it is basically like running a small business, which is what artists are doing. So I think that's really, really good advice. I also like, it was nice how you kind of made the separation between tangible ways that you can set those boundaries, and then I guess the bigger picture, like the longer game, which is working on your own boundaries and talking about your self-worth. Because for me, I find that even setting those tangible boundaries are really, really helpful for me, because sometimes my brain, I can't control what my brain is going to think or whether it's going to be thinking about work. But at the very least, having those like boundaries, like maybe putting your phone at the other corner of the room, or like shutting it down, shutting your work phone down at night. So like tangible boundaries are very, very necessary. And then I feel like it also helps me to work on the intangible things that are like, I guess, your demons, or like those challenges with boundaries that are really stemming from your self-worth and your relationship with your work. So yes, at least that's the first step, right? Like putting in place those tangible rules.
Yeah.
Okay, the next one I want to talk about, I guess it's more linked to Asian artists, because it's something that we talked about just now, which is like an inability to talk about mental health openly. And I think this is not so much of an issue in like with Western artists, because I do see a lot of them increasingly becoming advocates for mental health and things like that. But for me, like being based in Asia, I still feel that the conversation here is not, it's not as open when it comes to mental health.
I think that when it comes to talking about mental health, I think it's really important for us to remember that you have control in who you choose to hear your story, and not everyone has the right and not everyone has the privilege to hear your story as well. So you can be incredibly discerning about who your audience is, and that's often a really key indicator of success for how supported you feel in your mental health. And we already know in the back of our head, like people in our family, our friends, who probably won't listen, who'll probably give us really crappy advice, who'll probably be like, oh, just do this. Why don't you do this? Why are you so lazy? Right?
Yes,
and
exactly.
Then it's like, you don't need to talk about your mental health with those people.
Yes.
And if you don't have people in your life that you feel like they'll probably let me have my own experiences, and they'll probably let me express myself in the way I want to. If those people aren't available to you, that's when you can start to think about going to therapy, not because you're in some kind of crisis mode, but just somewhere where you can practice talking about your mental health and how you're going. And places like Shapes and Sounds, like come and join us at Shapes and Sounds, because this is where we have conversations, like, you know, like obviously free conversations on our Instagram, but we also have a membership model where people come and we talk about our mental health in this kind of intersection of culture and mental health. And it's a space where people are really new to the conversation as well. So our role as therapists is to guide you in helping you talk about your mental health. And we have lots of free resources. We've got a program called Talking Mental Health with Your Family as well, which literally gives you a step-by-step outline of how to have conversations about your mental health. Because you're so right, it's not common. And it's very important to acknowledge that it's not an easy thing to do. We might see a lot of people talking openly in the media about their mental health, but actually it can be very triggering. It can be very triggering if you're not supported as you express yourself. Even like if you're talking about stuff on social media, your audience members can get really triggered by things that you're saying too. So just like be really gentle with yourself and seek out support. And there are resources that tell you how to talk about your mental health too.
Yeah, I think it is, as you meant, I think you mentioned two like really important points. The first one being that you know which other people you should be talking to about your mental health and which you shouldn't. And sometimes you just choose to talk to those people anyway. And that's like a whole nother thing. But I feel like it's kind of self-destructive behavior, which I do sometimes as well. But then the second thing was kind of that I guess it's important to be discerning about the people you talk about it to. And it doesn't always have to be an open conversation like with fans or something like that. Yeah, I think that's a very important, an important point that artists need to take note of, because talking openly about it can happen in many different settings. Yeah. Awesome. And I guess the last one is that sometimes as I mentioned before, artists might have experience of being in like certain traumatic circumstances. And I think it happens a lot in the music industry because the barriers to entry are not high here in terms of like education level, in terms of qualification, and also because the fact that what your craft is tied so closely to you as a person, and the lack of boundaries that causes, especially for people working in the music industry. I think that all kind of leads to like an increased rate of exploitation and potentially even like sexual harassment and even like rape. And I know there's a big conversation in the Australian music industry happening about this sexual harassment within within Australian record labels that are happening towards women at the moment. So yeah, I wanted to know how you would best advise artists to start this conversation.
Yeah, I think definitely like you're not alone, and don't do it alone. There's no need to push through trauma. That supports are available, and yes, they cost time and they cost money, but there's nothing more important than feeling safe and taking care of yourself. So if you have experienced something, like, it is a bit of a journey to find supports, but definitely do it. Reach out for support. You don't have to do it alone.
Thank you so much for answering all the like rapid fire questions about this. I think honestly, I do think like it's really, really helpful. I see a lot of artists, especially in Asia, like they don't see any other option other than going to like a label or something like that. They don't necessarily have the right mindset to continue as an independent artist, which is why they're like, I want to get out of this situation as soon as possible. This is not the most ideal situation for me. But I feel like a lot of that comes from the mindset that they have. Not only the fact that, okay, maybe they don't have certain resources, they don't have access to like certain things, or they need like very specific support that only a label can provide. I guess that's definitely a thing as well. But I also think people confuse that with the mental health side of things. Like maybe they're getting into their own heads, maybe they don't realize that, I mean, it's really about a mindset change that needs to happen in order for them to really make good decisions about their career. And that's really what the Level Up podcast is about. Like, I think we talk a lot about how not about specific resources that, oh, you go and do this, go and read this or whatever. It's really more about asking questions to help you change your mindset and your perspective about being an independent artist, so that you can really, when those big decisions come, you can be in like a really, really good position to make it. And that's why I think mental health is a really, really important conversation to have, because I think it's a really, really big part of it.
Yeah, that's so true. Hey,
yeah, exactly. And I also think that artists are really they're in a really amazing place, because if they do have the right mindsets about mental health, they have a community, they have like a voice to raise these questions and topics in a way that makes people like sit up and listen. So I was wondering if you had any advice on like, okay, if they were to talk about it in maybe more public spaces, like is there any advice you have about how they can like create like genuine and like productive conversations around this topic? Because as we've mentioned, there are ways to do it which are productive and ways to do it which may not be so productive.
Yeah, great question. And I don't know what you think about my answer, but I feel like with artists, especially now, like we ask so much of our artists, right? Like we want them to make music that sounds good, and that music also has to be meaningful, and it has to be related to like a traumatic experience in their life. And they have to have a social justice cause now. And they have to like wear ethical clothes and like they have to do everything. And then they have their Instagram, so they have to like look amazing and have a beautiful aesthetic as well. And sometimes I think like, yes, people have a network and a platform that they can talk about mental health and raise causes and raise issues, but actually like maybe that's more like this area, this arena that you're sitting in, which you're doing right now, having these conversations about mental health, and kind of like taking that burden off the shoulder of the artist, so that the artist can like go and live their best life and just make music, you know, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because I think something that's really important is we lead by example. People are always watching what we're doing, rather than like listening to the words that we're saying. People kind of, you know, people learn through watching, like they're sensing things about you. So if you as an artist take care of your mental health, you write the music that you want to write, you like, especially in Melbourne, it's like, go and live your best summer. We've been in lockdown for so long. Like, go and have like joy in your life again. And then through that process, you are going to affect so many people. You're going to help uplift a whole bunch of people who've been craving live music and missing seeing you on stage. That yeah, sometimes I think it's more the role of yourself and me to have these conversations for our artists, because they should just like make the music, which they do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's actually a really, really like good perspective to have on that. I think I do agree. In a certain in majority of me agrees, and then sometimes like I feel, I mean, because sometimes maybe the artists themselves, they do feel strongly about this particular topic and they want to be vocal about it just because they have that social justice element to their experiences or something like that. So I think maybe in certain spaces, yes, they can talk about it openly, but of course only if they want to. I think it's very unsustainable to expect every artist to have this social justice focus, because then it becomes like a gimmick. And if it's not like authentic, then of course it's not going to resonate with your audience anyway. And as you mentioned, like I think you're right, it should come from like the artist taking care of their mental health, taking care of their craft, working on that, and then if it comes through in their music, it'll come through in their music, right? Like if they're like they feel so strongly about this particular cause, it will come through. So that's I think it's really, I love that you gave that advice. It's like something that was not expected, I don't think. But yeah, I love it.
Yeah. And I think, okay, I'll give like a tangible answer as well. Like, I think if you want to talk about things like, you know, mental illness or difficult things that have happened to you, know that if you have a platform, a social media platform, like it is a privilege, like you have a lot of power, I should say. You have a lot of power when you have a platform. And that means that takes like responsibility as well. You can't just throw around things like, this awful thing happened to me, because the people that engage in that content will also get triggered by that. It's really, this is like social media, you know. And also the most shocking thing that you say gives you the best algorithm as well, like or like, you know, affects the algorithm the best, and you get the most engagement. So being really mindful of that, like not going for shock value when you talk about mental health, because yes, you'll get more engagement, but actually, like, are you really promoting and talking about mental health, or are you making your followers feel more anxious and more stressed? So you can kind of think about that when you share messaging too.
Yeah, I think that's also like a really good tangible advice, because I think artists also have a very complicated relationship with social media. I guess most public figures do. And yeah, you should definitely think about that, especially if your message is coming from a good place, which it should. Yeah. If it's not coming from a good place, then maybe don't share it. Yeah. I think social media is already it's already like not just for artists themselves, but for any of us using it in a huge capacity. Actually, it has a very, very big impact on our mindset and on our mental health as well. Yeah. It was really amazing having this conversation, but just before we go, I wanted to ask, do you have any words of advice for indie artists who are like struggling with their mental health at this like present time?
Definitely find us on our socials, find us on Instagram. That's probably the best place. What we offer is we have a membership group. Well, we've got a lot of free programs and free resources that might help you on your journey to getting psychological support, especially if you're based in Australia, or just kind of exploring your identity a little more in relation to your mental health. At the same time, we have a membership group called the Shapes and Sounds Club, which we're kind of rounding up for this year, but we'll relaunch again in March. And that's a really soft entry point for people interested in prioritizing their mental health, interested in forming like a culture of caring for your mental health, rather than just like, engaging with mental health services in times of crisis. But this is like a bit of a shift, creating a culture of just generally caring for yourself in that way, your mental health. So find us, sign up for our waiting list. JustShapesandSounds.com is where you'll find that. And I would say, like, don't forget that you are your brand, which means that you, like, if you burn out and if you're out, then the beautiful craft and the beautiful music and the art that you make also disappears. So even if it means stepping away from making stuff for a while and creating, if you need to take care of yourself, that's got to be your number one priority. I laugh again because I'm like telling myself, it's like a motivational speech for myself as I do this podcast.
As is for all of us, but I think definitely, right? Yeah, great advice.
Prioritize yourself more than anything. You do what you need. It doesn't matter what what your ancestral culture tells you. It doesn't matter what the Western world tells you. It doesn't matter what you yourself have been taught by your parents, from school, from the media. At the end of the day, if you look within, if you just like take a moment to ask yourself, what do I need? Then that's the answer. Like, we're always like, what are the experts telling me? What is authority telling me that I need to do to improve my mental health? But actually, you already know the answer, and you just need to take a moment to listen and then also trust that cue. Like, if you just ask yourself, what do I need right now? You'll hear a little voice. It's like, oh, I need to rest. But then we always override the system. We're like, no, I can't rest. I have to do this. I have to do this. Or I'm lazy, so I can't rest. When really, you just need to trust. You just need to trust that. And you don't need an expert to tell you what you already know. Just like look inwards.
Awesome.
It's very, very deep at the end, right?
Yeah, super deep. But I mean, like, I think it's very, very good advice that to trust yourself, because I feel like your body knows. It knows you. It's just like you trying to override it sometimes, and maybe like you can't hear it because maybe you just have too many things on your mind, or you're trying to actively block it out. But definitely great advice. So of course, all of Shapes and Sounds links will be down in the show notes below. We'll also put some resources down there that we found just to help anyone who's listening who needs some guidance. So thank you again, Asami, so much for being part of our podcast. Your advice has been invaluable. Everyone go follow her on like Just Shapes and Sounds at Instagram. I really love your page.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me, and good luck, everyone. Send me your music, please.